program, you're an actuary, I've not worked with somebody like you, and also I was quite young. And I think just that was being, kind of first challenge. I remember even within my office, there was another Black person who worked in the investment department, and she worked down south. And for the entire first year, one of my colleagues kept on calling me her name because that was the only other point of reference that they had. And I think, part of the challenge really is to differentiate between the kind of well-intentioned and the malicious. People will make mistakes. People will have, not have had the experience of working with people who look like me or people who look like others. And I think it's just, allowing people to be able to ask questions, allowing people to be able to have that conversation with you and feel as if they're in a safe space. I think also just another challenge, probably even just myself, that having that, we talk about imposter syndrome. So as I developed in my career, really just kind of, pepping myself up to say, well, actually, you have the confidence, you know what you're doing. And I think what happens is when you're in the minority, you're constantly being judged, you're constantly being asked to define your identity, and it can be quite tiring. So I think just, those challenges around, whether it be me trying to find my own space or other people trying to place me into a bucket, I think were all things that I had to really work on to break through. And I think the breakthrough really came when I was able to connect my passion with my purpose. And when I moved into my current role in the Institute, where I was able to say, well, actually, here are the things that I'm good at. Here are the things that I want to do, and actually finding a role that actually connected with that. And I think that's where, for anybody, that's where you really get an opportunity to truly shine. Just in terms of reflections, on organizations and how they've responded, as we said, it's a year following the death of George Floyd. And I think for me, it's really around that disparity between what organizations have said and what they're actually doing. Horatio reflected on the limited progress earlier. And, there are challenges with respect to race. We have to accept that. And, now that people and organizations have found a voice, you already have the backlash where people are saying, oh, well, actually, oh, gosh, I can't believe we're still talking about this. I can't believe we're still talking about race. But one of my favorite articles at the time last year was titled, "Dear Boss, I've just seen a Black man dying in the street. I'll make sure I'll get the report to you by 5 p.m. today." And actually just that, the connection between George Floyd in the US and how it resonated across the world, this is not something that we can escape from, just recognizing the fact that this affects us all. And so I think the thing for me that, constantly bothers me is how tired people get when you highlight a social justice issue. There's this war against the woke. And when you think about the original definition of woke, it was around being well informed, standing up and being alert to injustice, being alert to discrimination. And already society has turned this into something that is negative, where, oh no, you're trying to destroy old values and mottos. But we have to accept that the way things are isn't the way that it should be. And we have to keep on speaking about it. And we did it when it came to women's rights. And now it's just my privilege to sit in meetings where people are saying, oh, actually, there are no women on our panel. I'm not going to speak on it. Or actually, we haven't heard from this person, or we need to hire a woman. And people, men and women alike, are very vocal and very confident in being able to express those views. But race remains a challenge, and people are still scared to speak up, to stand up for what they believe in. And so I think my appeal to organizations is to keep on speaking up in the face of adversity, recognize that this is not a battle that's even, remotely being close to being won. And actually, similar to Sky Sports, where they constantly talk about, thinking about race and so forth, we all need to do that. We need to keep on banging on the drum until we get to a point where actually my daughter and my son can grow up in a society where actually they aren't judged by the color of their skin, but they're actually judged by what's on their mind. I think those are my initial comments, Horatio.
Thank you so much. Such a pleasure to hear those powerful opening remarks from Marissa. And what particularly stands out to me is this real idea of the disparity between words and action. And it's on that basis that I'm really happy to hand over to David Innis from AECOM, an executive director there, to give us his opening remarks.
Horatio, good evening, and good evening to all the audience as well. It's as if Marissa was looking over my shoulder and read my opening remarks. It chimed and resonated with me in a way which I know it did with you, in terms of the context, in terms of the circumstance, and in terms of the optimism for the future. Today, being the first day of George Floyd, clearly is a emotional and reflective day for all of us, as we look inwardly and outwardly at what has changed and what needs to change, and the role that we play. And I think us taking the time as professionals, as people, as communities, as a world for self-reflection is something that we need to do more of. And my thoughts and prayers go out to his family and friends and to the community at large. So by way of introduction, I'm David Innis. I'm Executive Director at AECOM. For friends and colleagues on the call who don't know what AECOM do, we are one of the world's largest professional services firm in the construction, design, engineering, project management field. We design and build and deliver big stuff. Airports, roads, ports, power stations, you name it, physical infrastructure. The environment that we live in, the place and community that we live in, we're an organization that has a hand in the development of that. And so you kind of think to yourself, well, you know, that's kind of engineering, construction, that's not really sexy. Well, actually, it's incredibly sexy, and it's heavily connected to community and place and society and people's lives. And that's a journey that we as an organization now understand, moving away from being just, you know, physically output driven in terms of the assets that we design and we build and we commission, to the engagement we have with communities around a space and environment, a place that they can live and they can nurture and they can develop them, their livelihoods, employment and training as well. My role, a bit like Marissa's, is client facing, and so my day job is I look after our strategic accounts across Europe. We are a 9,000 strong organization, and at a time where the United Kingdom decided to decouple itself from Europe, we as an organization, and AECOM is American by ownership, we decided to actually bring together the UK and European business, giving 9,000 people 15 different countries, 16 or 17 different spoken languages. So we're hugely diverse as an organization and as a geography. You know, the UK and I history, you know, the legacies of Windrush, the period before that, the migration of communities from the Asian subcontinent and around the world is distinctly different in the UK and I to France or Germany or the Nordics or Russia. And so we're always grappling the adaptation of EDI and the context in which it's applied in our organization. So how did I become an executive director in one of the world's largest professional service organizations? Well, I always had a dream that I wanted to work with an industry. I wanted to work in a corporate role. And so I was able to go to a great university. I felt like I had to work triply hard to get there. I'm sure that will resonate with people. To prove myself, I arrived. I was at university in the late 80s. I arrived, I look around, and surprise, surprise, I was the only Black person on the course, on my business and law course. I then wander around university and I'm looking for faces that appear to be like mine in some hue or shade. And again, there weren't many. And I think one of the largest communities was the Greek community who had chosen to come to university, and they were a group that I became very familiar with. But other than that, I didn't see people who looked like me, who came from my community, who'd come from my background. Interestingly, Mr. talked about being from Trinidad. My parents are from Guyana. And so if you know a Guyanese family, it's all about family, education, and food, you know, in that order. And so education was drilled into us at a very early age. Like many people, I came from a normal family. I guess in modern day families, we call it a working class family. But we were rich. We were rich in so many ways. We were rich in the opportunity to encourage an education and to be pushed in education and to be encouraged to dream. In the construction industry, needless to say, there aren't many ethnic minority senior professionals. You might imagine you will see people from ethnic minorities doing the more blue-collar jobs, as we might refer to them. But within the professions, as you move through the ranks, those people who are visible to wider organizations just aren't there. And so I chose a profession that wasn't an easy one to break into. And so I spent a large part of my career, again, being the only Black professional at conferences, on the speaking circuit, in the boardroom, and really trying to push the agenda. One of my reflections has been, and continues to be, equity, diversity, inclusion is something that we all do. We all have a part in playing and being part of that change. I used to naively think that I could move mountains by myself, that allyship wasn't important. I could influence because of my intellect and my charisma. As I've got older and wiser, I've realised that's really not the case. The importance of allyship, the importance of engagement and education and encouragement and open dialogue and conversation sits at the heart of how you embed ED&I across organisations, be they regional, national, international, or global, like ACOM. I think as I reflect back on the events of the past year or so, I'm kind of melancholy, is the way in which I describe it. The symbolism of George Floyd and what happened clearly was abhorrent. But we've seen it before, and I've seen it before in my lifetime. And so all the events, Suresh, you talked about in your opening remarks, I lived those experiences. That was in my lifetime. I've seen it. What I'd like to see now is the change. What I'd like to see now is just to move from a position of the strategy, which is all the reports that are ever done around the what, to the how. So how do we make the transition? How do we really kind of get out of the position of inaction and start to move the dial in small incremental stages? Now, my mum used to always say when we were growing up that Rome wasn't built in a day, and I never quite got what she meant when I was younger, but as I've got older, it's resonated more with me. And this is a Rome not built in a day type scenario. And Rome will be built, but Rome might take different forms over different periods of times with different generations. Marissa talks about her children and the expectations she has for them as well. I have 3 children. I have 3 teenagers. My eldest son is going to university this year. I want for his experience to be very different to mine. I want him to have all the opportunities. I want him to be assessed and judged on his abilities, intellect, his emotional intelligence, the contribution he can make to university, and the betterment in his profession. I want that for him and other kids from ethnic minorities. I think in closing, we as a people of the community have to also take a deep breath and accept there's feedback and perspectives that we have to take on the chin. And so my first call out, and again, really happy to be challenged on this as part of the conversation, my feedback to the community is, let's stop blaming other people. Let's take charge of our destiny. Let's do it together as a driving coalition. Let's have a focus. Let's have a plan. And let's be sensible about how we do it. And let's set sensible expectations. And I think if we do that, and if we're listening, if we're engaging, if we're educating ourselves alongside educating others, I think that people will start to meet us some way towards the middle. Not always, maybe sometimes never, but that will start to come together. So patience, pace, and focus, are the things that I would leave with as we enter into our discussion.
Thank you so much for that, David. Patience, pace, and focus. Really, really powerful. And everything that you said around us needing to work together, needing to come to understand the need for allyship, the need to make sure that we all are all in this together and focusing our resources is absolutely heard. And to that extent, before we continue to the next segment of today's activities. What we want to do really quickly is give all in the audience, whether you are on the direct stream or you are on the slightly delayed live stream, we want to ask you to participate in a quick poll that we have put together here. So in a moment, you will see a interactive poll that is going to come up on screen, and we're going to ask you to follow the instructions that you can see both on the screen and in the actual chat bar as well, to join us on menti.com, entering the code 23940220 in order to take part. And what we want to do is, again, with the focus that we have today on career progress, we want to understand how you think things have changed in your workplace since the death of George Floyd. Has it been the case that you've seen no change? Have you seen conversations but little material change? Have there been lots of conversations but little change? Have you seen lots of engagement and hotspots of meaningful change? Has there been significant firm level of engagement reinforced by leadership, which has led to organizational wide cultural change? Very, very interested in any reflections that you have here. So just as a starting point, it's really exciting to see that so far we haven't seen anyone in the not at all category. At minimum, we have been having conversations, and many people are of the view that we are making some change, some progress. Now, hopefully, in the context of this conversation, we can explore that a little bit more later on. But it is great to see that so many organizations have, at minimum, started conversations. And I guess one thing that we would be interested in reflecting on is, for those who have really only just started the conversation, what maybe next steps might look like, what some of those people would like to see within their organizations. And for people who have had team level engagement and some meaningful change, what has that been? What has that meant? Why is it that we've been able to achieve some of those things? Again, very, very keen to hear more about that. So we're just going to leave this poll for now. We'll allow people to continue to voting. Thank you so much for all of the reflections that you've shared so far. We are now going to move on to our next question. So to increase the representation of people in color, people of color in executive leadership positions, what is it that you think we need to do? Is it about improving access to knowledge and resources to support people in their professional development? Is it about people of color having to take personal responsibility for creating their own luck and opportunities? Is it about providing increased sponsorship and targeted support to level the playing field? Or is it about dismantling the structures and cultures that prevent diverse talent from entering and excelling in organizations? Whilst people continue to reflect on that, I'm going to come back to Marissa, and in her reflections, she highlighted the importance of being able to connect passion with purpose. And one of the things that is consistently held for people from diverse cultural backgrounds is that often there's perhaps an additional burden, in addition to focusing about the purpose that you have within work and what it is that you're really seeking to achieve. Maybe there's an additional burden in the diversity and inclusion space where you're also thinking about how it is that you can shatter some of the paradigms that might exist which have challenged or stopped people from progressing previously. And so the question that we would pose to you, Marissa, is how have you been able to keep hold of your purpose whilst potentially being able to perhaps champion any of the causes that you may have in the diversity and inclusion space? Have you seen them as separate? Have you seen them as something that have come together? How have they interacted with each other?
Yeah, that's a tough question, isn't it? I think there's an element of trying to be true to yourself while navigating a workplace. And in navigating the workplace, you have people who are very supportive and people who are, who listen to what you're trying to say, or at least try and understand the intent behind what you say. And you have people who will always have a kind of mind's eye into this is who you are and this is what you mean, and so on. And I always believe in life that you shouldn't really make heroes or villains out of anyone. From any single person, there are good elements of it and there are bad elements to them. And so effectively how I've navigated, the workplace is in everyone trying to find the bits of them that I think actually, that's great, that's super, you're amazing, while recognizing the fact that actually they will have flaws. And what that's allowed me to do is actually, be able to take the bits that I can admire, whether it be servant leadership or whether it be humility or people who are confident or people who are, willing to speak their mind, and be able to cut out some of the more negative stuff. So people who are arrogant or people who are, who aren't kind to people, etc. So I think it's that, it has been difficult, I think. And part of it, there is an element of serendipity. And I don't, people always talk about, well, oh, look at the 6 things that I did that led to success. But actually, you need to be in the right environment. That point that you had about culture in your last question was really powerful, because actually you need to be in an organization where the culture is supportive of that. And if you're not in that organization, then you probably need to change. And I think just being willing to take those brave moves and those brave decisions and say, actually, this job isn't right for me, or this environment isn't supportive, and actually go to another organization, I think is something that or another role within the organization is something that people need to spend more time assessing. So it's difficult, but I think I've been fortunate enough I've been with the same employer for the last 16 years or so. And with that, I've done different roles. And I think I've been fortunate enough to be able to have people where I can say, well, actually, I like these bits, and therefore I'll tap into those.
That's a really, really powerful reflection. And just before I turn to David, both of you have been able to achieve incredible career success. And I know that you're still not even finished where you are, particularly right now. And for many people, they would reflect on your experience and say, okay, you've been able to progress as far as you have, as quickly as you have. Do you think that it's possible for others to do so, particularly in the context that we have so many conversations around the balance of responsibility? To what extent is it the responsibility of the individual? To what extent is it the responsibility of the firm? To what extent is it serendipity? Is it luck, as you were saying before? How is it that we make sure that as many people as possible who would like to be able to progress along the ladder are able to feel encouraged and empowered to do so?
Yeah, no, I absolutely think you need to have those structures in place. And better organizations are those which basically look at and constantly reassess the structures and say, well, hold on, why is it that, people who are minorities within my organization, underrepresented groups, aren't progressing? Or why is it that there's disparity around pay? David talked about equity, diversity, and inclusion. And the equity bit is incredibly important, because this is around fairness and justice and making sure that people have access to the same opportunities. And so does your organization sit down and do talent reviews and do check-ins? And do you have mentors, and do you have sponsorship programs that actually work, that aren't just lip service? And does your diversity person actually report to the CEO as opposed to just being somebody in HR? So I think just in terms of trying to put, a kind of weighting on, well, is some of it serendipity, is some of it structure, and so forth. I mean, you can't account for serendipity. I believe, that actually a lot of it is through, for me anyway, just, yes, having the right structures, having the right culture. I have a faith, and therefore, a whole lot of praying, I think, gets involved in that. But I think it's just, you need to be able to navigate the climate. And I think that's what I do when I do my mentoring sessions with young people. You need to pick up and, reflect on the things that you think, actually, this is working, this is not working, or you just need to change because this organization isn't right for you.
Really, really interesting. And you touched on sponsorship. And I know earlier on, David, you highlighted the importance of allies, the importance of not going it on your own, the importance of being able to work with others. And I was really interested in being able to take that a little bit further. So many people get lost around the idea of allyship, sponsorship, coaching, all of the different words that are often bandied about in the diversity and inclusion space. I wonder if you have any reflections on them. And when you say that it was important for you to be able to work with other people, what did that actually mean? And how did that help you in your own career progress?
Yeah, well, when I graduated, I went on a graduate program within transportation, and transportation as an industry was quite diverse in terms of railway, the underground, because we follow our history back, working in Transport for London, British Rail as it was then, and that space was as common as when our parents came and worked in the NHS, and so there was a history there. So that was very diverse, and I learned when I was on the graduate program the importance of networking. And so I'm going to use a piece to kind of call things out in a really plain way for colleagues on this call. Don't think because you're the brightest, most capable person in the room that when the job comes and you're pissing for it with somebody else, it may not be from an IT group, that even though you think you're brilliant, that you're going to get it. Because I can tell you, the other person will get it because they'll be half as good, but they'll be great at networking and they'll have sponsorship. And so my reflection, if I was doing it again, any early career professional on this call, is start now. Start to build your network. Start to build your support system of peers and seniors who advocate for you, who you can learn from, who you can emulate in your own image. So you are authentic. Take advantage of the various kind of HR processes or support systems that are there. As well. And so networking is hugely important. As you move through your career, it's important, again, that you don't assume by just doing your job you'll get noticed. You have to do your job and you have to do a bit extra. For anyone on this call, doing a bit extra is something that we've done all of our lives. And so we have to do a corporate environment. And so I do a very big day job with clients who spend a huge amount of money with us, into the hundreds of millions of pounds, with a massive team of 9,000 people. But actually, I also sit on our global equity, diversity, inclusion global board because I'm passionate about this. I'm passionate I am in a position to influence and make a practical change in the organization so we do have equity. Some of the other things that we have to look and reflect as professionals is the importance of us standing up, us not being a corporate bystander. And what I mean by that is us standing up and saying, yes, I'll do that speaking part, or yes, I'll go along to that meeting and represent the organization and push yourself into the light. And again, from my experience during my time as I grew through my career, whilst there weren't many of us, we didn't always get the opportunity to step into the light, but certainly I grabbed every opportunity that was available to do that. And that's provided me with a level of confidence and assurance about my abilities and what I can do. Why did I do that? I did that because I wanted to compare myself with others from all backgrounds. And that's given me confidence in my career to allow me to think that I can continue to dream. And so whilst I'm in a very senior role now, I do sometimes reflect back and think, well, actually, if I was the same David Innis from Guyana, but whose parents may have been white, where might I have been now? Could I have been the chief executive of an FT 100 company? Could I have achieved that? And so that's a conversation I have with myself. But I never have regrets because my journey's been my journey. What I want to do now is to provide and open the door for others through mentoring and coaching. I'm reverse coaching other senior colleagues as well, so they understand our lived experiences. And so, again, my words will always be one of encouragement and also self-reflection for us to take some personal responsibility as well. And when people say no, push harder at the door. And if the door's not opening by yourself, get someone alongside you and they can push with you. And I can tell you, when you get that group of people around, the door will no longer be on its hinges. And once we're through, And once they can see what we can do, how we can operate, and our abilities and our perspectives and our diversity of thought, they will allow others through behind us.
Really interesting reflections. And just before we jump back into the interactive poll, one of the things that you highlighted was this idea of people from diverse cultural backgrounds potentially having to do a little bit more. And actually, this is an idea that many people have spoken to, the idea that you have to go work multiple times as hard to go half as far potentially. And many people challenge this idea because they say, well, you've gone to university, you live in a space where you have so many options and connections, and at a certain point in time, is it the case that this claim is no longer valid? I'd be interested in any reflections you have on this, and I'll open up to Marissa as well.
Yeah, and so I spent many years at PwC. I had the pleasure of being part of the senior leadership team at PricewaterhouseCoopers, another incredible kind of professional service firm, kind of globally. And when I was there, I worked really, really hard. I worked really long hours, and there was lots of benefit in terms of the experience I got. When I fast forward then to where I am now in an even more senior job in a bigger organization, I still work hard, but I work smart. And so, again, the distinction between working hard for the sake of working hard and working smarter is the distinction that I would highlight today. Be smart, have a plan, understand where your position can pivot you into a position of influence or change or conversation. And by having a plan, thinking it through, mixing in a bit of luck, mixing a bit of opportunity, you'll start to see the value of that extra bit that you do. So it's not about extra hours and volume of work, it's about a bit of smartness and having a clear plan.
Really, really insightful. Marissa, did you have anything to add to that?
So I find your comeback fair, Horatio, and I think, when I think about race is just one part of my identity, just one aspect. I'm a woman, I'm a mother, I mentioned before, I'm an actuary, sometimes I'm an angry citizen, sometimes I'm a happy citizen. All of these different aspects are part of me. And when I walk into a room, it very much depends on the context in which I'm in. So sometimes I walk into a room and certain aspects of my identity get played more so than others, just by the nature of it. I have no singular claim to diversity. I don't stay home in my living room and think, oh gosh, look how diverse I am. Diversity is very much something that happens in a group and a group context. And so actually recognizing the bits of you where you can add value to your team is actually incredibly important, because you have something that you want to say. I think what you touched on a little bit was around this idea of privilege. And there are many privileges that I have, and David mentioned some of this too. And there's privilege that I don't have. Yes, I have a privilege around the fact that I'm English speaking, and that's my natural language. And we know so many people in this society get discriminated because it's not necessarily their first language. I have a privilege in the fact that I went to university and I'm educated, and we know, if the pandemic was anything to teach us, so many people in lower waged jobs and lower income societies, they were at the cold face of the pandemic, but I have one privilege which isn't afforded to me, which is around race. And I think people need to recognize that this isn't just about, okay, well, somebody's Black versus somebody's white. It's recognizing the fact that we all have privileges, and we all each have areas where our privilege isn't afforded. And race is a challenge. It is an issue. It is something that, just this week we saw it in football, when it comes to, chanting and crowds. We see it in people who are saying, well, somebody's just playing the race card. We see it in, oh, well, actually, this isn't a thing. And we're still 1 year on from George Floyd's death. And can we genuinely see that we have seen real change and real progress? And so to downplay race and say, well, oh, it's just not an issue. What about all the other people who are suffering? Well, injustices happen in parallel. There are lots of injustices in the world. But that doesn't mean that race isn't an injustice. And so until, I recognize the privileges that I have, and I have to use the privileges that I have to fight for and to speak about the issues of the privileges that others don't. And so I completely get your point about, whether it is, or do you have to work harder or not, but let's be bold and let's just recognize that race is something that we still have to deal with in our society.
Really, really valid point. And reminds me of a reflection that I'd heard before, that many of us have heard, in relation to CVs as a really clear example of how race potentially, specifically by itself, can have an impact, and how the name of a person on a CV potentially might be selected or not selected on that basis. I think you're absolutely right that we all have certain levels of privilege, but we know that there are issues and challenges that come specifically because of race. And because you may have privileges in one space doesn't mean that you, because of your race, are not going to face other kinds of challenges. Really, really valid. And so in a moment, we will be going to the audience for further questions and answers. I can see that we've already got some suggestions which are coming through, and we will definitely be turning to those in a moment. But for now, I'm going to quickly take us back to our online poll just so that we can continue the conversation a little bit further. And so what we've seen is actually many people have highlighted that both not only is sponsorship important, but there's a real piece around being able to dismantle structures. And actually, the next question that takes us to is, in terms of helping you to progress your career at your current organization, how helpful and available are the following? So we have a mix of different ideas here: internal leadership training, external leadership courses, shadowing seniors, reverse mentoring initiatives, financial support to gain professional or academic qualifications, having a senior sponsor, career coaching, and career development roadmap. So over the last year, and perhaps even longer in many instances, people have been thinking about the variety of support that is available to them. And many of the questions have been from organizations: what can we do? What is it that we can do to really significantly move the needle? And actually, as we answer the question that's up on screen at the moment, again, I turn to David and Marissa and I say, for organizations who are in a space that are thinking, look, we take this agenda seriously. We want to be able to have serious action. There is so much that we can do. There is so much competing evidence, but we want to do or start off with the thing which is going to make the most amount of difference. What kinds of things fit that mold? And so maybe we'll start off with David and then come back to Marissa. What are the key things that we can do or should be prioritizing our efforts to initially?
So at ACOM, we had started our journey into equity, diversity, inclusion sometime before the George Floyd events. George Floyd has obviously amplified the need for a pace of change. We've done self-reflection, we've done self-diagnostic on our processes, we've had external reviews and benchmarked ourselves against our peer group, we've looked at good practice, and we have taken all of that data, both qualitative and quantitative, and adapted it across our different regional areas. And so the application of equity, diversity, inclusion, and social justice in the UK is very different to that of Saudi Arabia, let's say, or India or Malaysia, countries where we operate, where we have clients. And so for us as an organization, adaptation is hugely important. In Europe, we've been working and have developed an equity, diversity, inclusion strategy, which has a number of different dimensions and components. We appreciate this is about culture change, and culture change in organizations is a generational thing, 3, 5, 7, 10 years. So we're focusing on our leaders, and we're focusing on the importance of inclusive leaders. We have 400 senior directors across Europe, and we're starting with them. We're putting them through. We're having conversations. We're having the uncomfortable conversations on topics where a number of them struggle and don't know how to even start a conversation. We're giving them tools. We're giving them resources. We're giving them a new language to talk about, and we're giving them the confidence that empowers them as experienced professionals to walk down roads that many of them haven't felt comfortable walking down before. So the inclusive leadership point is really important, and that'll be ongoing. That's not just about equity, diversity, inclusion. That's about our people strategy in its broadest sense. How do we attract, retain, develop the best talent there is from the communities that we serve? How do we do that in a meaningful way? How do we develop an employee value proposition that means when smart, bright, future leaders from ethnic diverse professions are making choices about where they choose to grow their careers, that they come to us? So we're effectively doing a root and branch review of our operating model. And so that's the level that we've gone to. We, again, in Europe for the first time, have appointed our first head of equity, diversity, inclusion, a very in thing at the moment across corporate organizations. And we wanted to bring in one of the best people we could get who's seen organizational inertia at the front end. And so we have appointed a lady called Rachel Billington, who's the ex-head of EDI at the Met Police. And Rachel comes with years of experience of working with that organization in terms of how you embed and kind of develop change. And so there are a number of things: inclusive leadership, the continuous engagement with our people. So we've developed employee resource groups. Some organizations call them affinity groups. So groups that are around how people self-identify. So today we had our remembrance of George Floyd. We had over 500 people on the call. The Ethnic Diversity Network ran that, and we had lots of allies who came along and who were hugely supportive. We're launching LGBTQ plus ERGs, and as well as a women's ERG. And so we're doing top down and bottom up. And then the final and third element in the next 12 months, because it's bite-sized chunks, this is a marathon that we're running at a pace that's appropriate for us, not a sprint. The third element is around comms and engagement and community and communication, engagement with our communities and the professional bodies that many of our professionals are part of. And we think there is plenty in those three elements of our operating model within the first 12 months for us to get our arms around and to allow ourselves some time to engage and speak and reflect, and to engage and speak and reflect, and to make decisions. And then in year two, we'll do some more again. And so that journey of continuous improvement will kind of come along. And my one bit of advice to anybody in organizations here is, don't try to eat the elephant whole. Just don't do it, because it's too big, it's too complex, and time and engagement is an important part of the process of cultural change.
Really, really useful. And same question to you, Marissa. If there was something that organizations should focus on first, what would that be in your view?
So I'll start off with probably just talking about the debate last week that you hosted, which was excellent. And it was really around, should organizations aggressively pursue policies on race? And you had your fors and your against. And regardless of where you sit on the side of the debate, I think the message that came out very strongly was actually organizations need to take action. They absolutely need to. This is an issue. And actually, if you believe people are at the heart of your business, it is something that you can't avoid. I know you've asked for one, but I think definitions matter. When you talk about diversity, what do you actually mean? And for many organizations, historically, it has been around gender. And for some organizations, it still is. And so for organizations, it sounds great, or we believe in diversity and inclusion, but actually what you're talking about is just one sector and one component. And it needs to be part of your DNA. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. It can't just be, oh, well, we have a female CEO and therefore we've done the job, or we hired a head of diversity and inclusion and we've done the job. Actually, it needs to go through the very core of your organization. And as part of Talk About Black, we often talk about the pipeline. So we talk about, what do you do on hiring and entry? What do you do in terms of as people progress throughout your organizations? What do you do when it comes to senior leadership? What do you do from a cultural perspective in terms of just breaking that taboo? And actually, the bit that organizations often forget is, you can't just wait for people to come to your door, apply for jobs, and then you say, oh, well, there's not enough talent in the pipeline. You have a role to play in society to actually attract diverse talent to your business. So are you working with organizations and going into universities and going into schools and bringing people as part of that community? So, I mean, I'm very conscious of your time, Horatio. There's loads of stuff that can be done, but I just want to just make the point that it's time to do something now, and it needs to be very much in the core of your organization's culture.
Thank you so much, both to you, Marissa, and to David. And before I open up to the audience, we're going to have a one quick look again at the last poll, because I just wanted to draw out a few things that we've seen from the interactive poll at the moment. So if we take a look at the poll, what we see is that one of the most common forms of activity that's been available has been reverse mentoring. Now, what's interesting there is, as much as it's been available, it isn't perhaps the highest in terms of what people have felt has been the most helpful. Now, obviously, there might be some level of challenge, and we are working from a limited base here, but just really interesting to kind of see where that has put us. And actually, people have really highlighted what perhaps amongst some of the strongest, the importance of senior sponsorship. And I think this aligns very much with what you were saying, Marissa. Who is it that is linked, the diversity and inclusion head is linked to? Do they have a straight line to the CEO? Are they siloed off in the HR space where they're not really connected? But also for the individual themselves, do they feel as though there are people in the organization who are ready to sponsor them and to give them the assistance that they need to kind of move forward? Or is it, again, and I guess that also plays a part in what David was speaking about previously, about working collectively, recognizing that as he came into whichever organization it was, he wasn't going to overcome everything by himself. It was through that collective effort, being able to bring together the different stakeholders, aligning so that there was allyship, making sure that people were working together. That was always going to be the best chance that he had in order to make progress. And just before we move forward to the Q&A, audience, get your responses ready wherever they may be. You'll be welcome to submit them either via the chat or online in a moment. I'd be interested just quickly to go to Marissa and David just to get your reflections on what we see on screen at the moment. Does this align with the view that you may have had of some of these offerings? And perhaps starting with Marissa in this instance.
So I think all of these are options. What I can see is everything is in the kind of top half. And so, people are finding initiatives to various extents helpful. And what it shows me is that actually for an organization, there's no magic bullet. Actually, you need to have a variety of approaches to tackle this elephant, as David says. And for some things appeal more to other people. So, I mentor people. I am part of a reverse mentorship program as part of the work that I do in Investment 2020. And yes, that works for me, but for somebody else, it might not. When it comes to looking at career coaching, for instance, having a talent development program, well, that works for some people and it doesn't. But I think the one thing which I don't necessarily see here, maybe it is part of the career development roadmap, is this idea that actually, for a lot of people, you have the talent and you have the role, and basically you have the talent trying to fit into the kind of the square shape of the role. And actually, as organizations, what we need to be better at doing is saying, well, individual, person, what are the skill sets that you have? And actually, let's try and draw out some of those skill sets. And that's that point about being able to match purpose with passion. If you're trying to bring the best out of people, actually, you need to look at the roles that they're in and think, well, what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? And can we cut and paste, and can we shift things around? And what we've had previously is management, which has basically wanted to have everybody in as a square shape and fit them together, Whereas actually we're starting to respect people's identity more, respect individual differences more. And so what we're ending up is kind of management needs to do the hard work of fitting these beautiful kind of jigsaw pieces together to actually create a mosaic. And I think the challenge really is around management changing its style and way, and not trying to say that this is what you need to look like as a consultant, this is how you need to sound, but actually exploring those differences, because that's really how you're able to leverage diversity.
Really valuable. And David, any additional reflections on that?
Yeah, I think adaptation is key. I think all of these are ingredients, but adapting those, refining those to each individual, I think is key. I think Marissa's observation around square pegs and round holes is one that most industries recognise, whatever they might be. And I think the past 15 months or so, given where we've all found ourselves globally, has again opened that Pandora's box around the ability for organisations to be nimble and adaptive in terms of how they operate their businesses and how they engage and support their people, and how they kind of provide opportunity and kind of pastoral care. I guess if there was a management book that you could write on this to provide all the answers, imagine Marissa and I would have written it by now and done very well off the back of doing it. This is really complex. It's really diverse. It's multifaceted and multifunctional. Organizations are different. Organizations' maturities are different. The professions are different. And so, the application of some of these things might be right for me in construction and the built environment, but might be very different in financial services. And so, I would never say there's one chapter that, we can all read that gives us the answers. It's about options, and it's about some of the choices that we choose to make as professionals. And back to the point I made before about us taking some personal responsibility. And if we aren't getting it from our current employer, we should be asking ourselves, is this the place I want to make home, given the fact we spend more time with our employees than we probably do our families? And or where else can I get that support if those things aren't provided? And again, organizations like yours, Serenity, kind of provide that platform.
Thank you so much to David and Marissa. And on that basis, we are very, very happy to turn to the final segment of today, which is our question and answer session. So for all of those who may either be on the on live stream or on the direct stream, we welcome you to go to menti.com. The link is in the description, entering the code 23940220, and that will give you an opportunity to put any questions to the panel directly. So we will bring that back again in a moment once you've had an opportunity to submit your questions. But for now, we have had one which has been thrown at us so far, and that has been thrown to you, David. And this comes from Laura, who asks, it would be great to see an example of what your plan looks like throughout your career, David. And I guess we can apply that to Marissa also. What did your plan look like? Was it structured? Did it continue to change?
Yeah, and so great question, Laura. And so my plan was, my dream was, I always wanted to work in a big building in the city, doing something in business. That was my plan. It was as loose and as wide as that. And so I tried a couple of things in my career. I tried some different sectors. I did retail. I did transportation and rail. I did consultancy. When I landed in consultancy and this is business consulting and strategy consultancy, I felt that was home. I felt that was something I could do. I'd done a business and law degree. I didn't want to become a lawyer. It didn't appeal to me. I wanted to run a business. I wanted to run people. I wanted to do operations. I wanted to get my hands dirty. And so I found my profession in terms of professional services. And I had a passion for, as I said, construction, infrastructure, place, community. And so I also found my sector. And I chose to then grow my career that way. And I did it in a number of ways. And so, you move between jobs and you hopefully, when I was younger, I would have said it was about the more senior job. But when you start to decide yourself, there's something called a lattice career. There's a ladder career and a lattice career. I started to take a more lattice career, which I did a couple of sideway moves to get more experience in a different area. And then I went up. And so it was a bit of a game of snakes and ladders, the position where actually now I'm in a place where I feel absolutely comfortable in a great organization that is open to kind of new ideas. I also challenged myself. I challenged, and so have had coaches and mentors along the way. Interestingly, my reflection on my plan is I caught on early on having a coach or mentor was a good thing, even as a graduate. And I think I was probably the first one in my graduate intake to kind of identify somebody. Needless to say, there wasn't anybody who looked like me. And so the choice was quite small. You know, it was kind of white middle-aged men. I have, however, had some great female mentors. So, and again, this is in the 80s and 90s when, again, women were very much talking up about their careers, and there's a really strong movement. And so some of my greatest mentors have been women because they could relate with the journey that I was on. They could relate with the fact of being a minority in an industry that was male-dominated. They could relate with being looked over. They could relate with inequity. And so that was a really important part of my plan. And then I made some choices, Laura. I made some choices about what I would accept and what I wouldn't accept. And so have I been a bystander in my career when things have got wrong? Have I not spoken up? Yeah, absolutely. We've all been there. I can tell you now, I'm certainly not a bystander. I'm in the middle of the fight, sometimes refereeing, but also sometimes delivering the blows as well. And I think that comes with experience and seniority. So have a plan, be confident you plan, have some external challenge. Don't be afraid to self-reflect and to change, and do something you love, and do something you're passionate about, and do something that gives you purpose and drive.
Awesome. And just before I throw that question over to Marissa, I think it's useful just for us to quickly take a look at some of the questions that have been thrown to us. They are now coming thick and fast. And so in addition to the previous question, Marissa, where we've been thinking about what the career plan looks like, the grand master plan, we're going to come to that in a moment. But in addition, could you also explore what has been the best support or advice that has helped you along that journey? So again, without any further ado, I'll just quickly throw that back over to you, Marissa.
Compound question. I hope I do it justice. To the first one around, career plans, I think for me, it was more around career principles and the things that I really held true to, and that allowed me to make the decisions that I was able to make. So I think just following on from David's last point, yes, we've talked about to be able to find your purpose, to be able to connect with passion. And for me, a lot of it was around, I wanted to have an impact. I wanted to have an impact on my industry, to have an impact on large asset owners and asset managers. The financial services industry, particularly the investment industry, has some of the most influential capital in the world. And even within the Institute, I talked about, we have 15 members, $12 trillion of assets under management. And that actually allows me to be able to have a voice and to be able to help pursue our mission around moving capital to building that sustainable future. So looking at things like, yes, climate change and inequality and culture and diversity. So I think I always looked for roles where actually it would allow me to be able to be able to have that voice. I think the other thing is around, the other principle is really around being comfortable with being uncomfortable. And, this probably links in a bit to your second question around, some of the best advice I've received is that if the next job that you do is similar to your last job, you're not really making progress. And so actually you need to be able to say yes more than you say no. You need to be able to, put yourself into situations where you think, oh gosh, I'm not sure if I can do it, and really challenge and test yourself. So I spend a lot of time speaking in front of, audiences. I spend a lot of time writing and so forth. And all of that is as a result of just, from the time I started my career, just saying yes more than no. I think, servant leadership, we touched on this a bit earlier, as a leader in an organization, you really need to be, yes, the first one in and the last one out. You're the person where the buck stops with you, and you need to make sure that the people that you work with feel as if they can trust you and they can rely on you. And so just having that sense of responsibility, making sure that you check in with people, making sure that, in my team, we do something called a 30-minute stand-up, where every Wednesday, it actually is a conversation around how are you? Obviously we're a bunch of nerds, and so therefore we like to put scoring and statistics on it. And so, out of 10, tell us how stressed you are. Out of 10, tell us how engaged you are, and the difference being the kind of net happiness score. And we've been tracking that since COVID began till now, just to monitor the kind of mood of the team. And linked into that servant leadership is, a lot of caring and kindness. You needing to be understanding that actually we are all trying to work during a pandemic, and work and life have collided in a way that never really has before. And so just having that patience with people, is I think incredibly important. So I think there's a lot of stuff going on there. I can't say that I've kind of had a master plan, but what I can say is that I love what I do, and I've been fortunate enough to find it. And I think, just as a final point, I think the Serenity Prayer always kind of comes to mind, just having the courage to, do what you're doing, and to understand the things that you can change and the things that you can't, and having that wisdom to know the difference. And I think, what that allows me to do is not get panicked and stressed over things, but actually recognizing that there are some fights that are worth fighting, and some things which other people need to. And linking that back to our conversation around race, absolutely every one of us here, regardless of what you look like, should be fighting for this cause, because this is an injustice, and this is something that actually affects the lives of all of our children, whether you're white, whether you're black, whether you're whatever. And I think that just recognizing this point actually makes the issue, I think, so much closer to mind. So yeah.
Amazing. And we are almost out of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the thing that people know that I do on a regular basis, which I'm going to go through every single question. And what I'm going to basically ask each of our panelists to do is, as they think about their final reflections and the advice that they're going to leave us with, you can try to interweave as many of the questions as you can into those responses. If you're able to do one, great. If you're able to do more than one, absolutely fantastic. But let me quickly take us through, and thank you to everyone in the audience who has submitted them. So, question number one, which is outstanding: what are the key transferable skills needed in consulting? Question number two: what are the key components of being an executive leader? Again, the key components of being an executive leader. Next question: it is evident that both of you would have succeeded even despite your race and gender. Well done. How do you balance the personal desire to grow with helping others? Very, very powerful question. Next question: what would you say has been your greatest accomplishment? Definitely an exciting one to have. Thank you again for the person who asked. And finally, which three leadership qualities have contributed to your success? So what's great is that so many of these questions do have some level of overlap. And what's going to happen is I'm just going to carry on talking for a little bit to give you just an opportunity to write down some additional reflections. And I'm seeing a really confident, happy smile with David. So we're going to go with David first. He's even winking at me. Wow. We're going to go with David first, and then we're going to hand over to Marissa, and then that will be your closing reflections, and I will tie things up right at the end. But once again, to everyone in the audience, thank you so much for your thoughts and reflections. We know that these questions and comments are really important, and we also believe that actually the people who are going to be answering them are amongst the best in the business to do so. So without any further ado, handing over to you, David.
Brilliant, thanks, Horatio. And so from the top, the transferable skills for consulting, the ability to think broadly with depth and breadth, the ability to assimilate information and be able to translate it back in a really understandable way to clients and to your people, the ability to actively listen and then then to talk. And I think the ability to be adaptive in terms of how you work and where you work, and changing between sectors, I think is important. I think key components of executive leadership, different for different people, different for different sectors. But who are some of the great leaders? There are great leaders who are more quiet, shy, retiring, but insightful. There are people who are great with the vocal work, who are great orators, who are great writers. For me personally, the ability to be able to communicate with people at every level, for every walk of life, and to be both heard and understood, I think is key. Somebody who has compassion and cares about people is a huge amount of it. Somebody who can energize a team to walk to the top of Everest, to do a drill session on top of the mountain, and then get them to walk back down to base camp. Somebody who can really motivate people to do that as well, and also somebody who allows people to dream and gives them the tools to make those dreams kind of become reality would be the key things. Personal things, greatest accomplishments. Well, I'm kind of halfway through my dance. I want to get to the end of the dance. There's so much I want to do, and there's so much I want to do with myself. There's so much I want to do with my family. There's so much I want to do to help others, other professionals, whatever professions they're in. And so I want to be a pioneer that lays the road for those who travel behind me or alongside me. I want the road to be there, back to my metaphor of the Romans, in 1,000 years' time, for people to say, actually, what those folks did back in the day has really made my journey easier. And so my accomplishment is to get this far in the race, but to understand there's more left in the engine to go further again, and to bring around influence as part of that. I guess accomplishments for me are things like this, the ability and privilege to come and learn and engage and share my insight with colleagues and professionals across the spectrum. The three leadership qualities, well, to the point that Innis made, I stick my hand up. I stick my hands up to things. I own things. I take leadership. I show leadership. I practice what I preach. So what you see is what you get. And so I'm a straight talker, and I'm a straight talker, but an informed straight talker as well. And I guess the third quality is I'm a realist. And I understand that this journey that I'm on, that I'll be able to put together some parts of the jigsaw puzzle, but others who follow, work alongside me, will have to do their part as well. At some point in the future, that jigsaw will be clear for us all to see. And actually, as quickly as we've done that one, there'll be a larger one as well. So that mosaic will continue to kind of grow. So they're my reflections. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I wish colleagues on this call all the best. Carry on doing what we're doing and more. Let's do it together. Let's have some fun along the way as well, and let's show the wider community that we're formidable people who have a lot more to offer and whose value they haven't seen the half of yet.
Thank you so much, David. And on that basis, happy to hand over to Marissa.
Well, I think the first thing I'll say is my handwriting is horrific, and so therefore I'm going to struggle to read the questions that I jotted down. But let me try. So I think the first was around transferable skills needed in consulting. And the first thing that came to mind was around being T-shaped. And T-shaped is a term that you hear quite a lot within my field, but I'm conscious that it's probably gobbledygook to everyone else. But it's that ability to have that depth within your specialism while also being broad enough to be able to connect the dots between multiple disciplines. And I think being T-shaped now more so than ever before is incredibly important. It's not good enough in 2021 to be able to say, oh, well, I'm just an equity analyst and all I want to do is be an equity analyst. You need to understand, how does that connect across multiple asset classes? How does that connect across with multiple disciplines? And I remember one of my favorite projects, it was probably a couple of years ago within my team, was where we were talking about finance and the investment industry, and at the same time drew inspiration from physics and trying to understand how value was created from a scientific context to be able to understand how that worked out in the industry. And particularly when we look at problems like climate change, it is such a complicated multidisciplinary problem, it's not enough for you to be able to stay in your field and say, well, I'm an investment person, but I need to be able to connect with people like David and say, well, how do the physical risk from climate change affect buildings and stadiums and businesses and so forth? So I think just having those, before we were very much focused on, well, okay, you need maths and you need econ and that kind of stuff, but actually we're looking for people who are able to do that connection between the dots and have the soft skills around communicating and around leadership skills to be able to make that effective. In terms of components of being a leader, I think it's really important to think about what is a leader. And people often think about, the top management of a company, but a leader is really anybody who has influence on other people. And so to some extent, we all can be leaders in an organization. And it's equally as important to be a leader as it is to be a follower and to understand what you can do as a team to support the mission and how you can lead the mission. So I think, I talked about servant leadership before, but not only do you need soft skills, but you also need to have soft power. And previously, when it came to leadership, people were looking at the dominant leaders who kind of dictated things from above. And actually, now what we find from even our own research, the more powerful leaders are the ones where they're able to just have that groundswell of support. And we see that when it comes to movements, linking it back to, we talk about the anniversary of George Floyd. It's the fact that everybody felt as if this was an issue that mattered to them and they got connected to the cause. And that's really how you turn soft power into hard power. Helping others, mentorship is incredibly important. If you think you're a leader and you're only focused on your career, then you're not doing it right. You have to learn from others, and you can learn from anyone really. One of the things that resonated with me, it was kind of towards the end, and I was speaking to one of my friends who was a hairdresser, and I've said this before, where she was talking about the effect of the pandemic on her, and she lives in one of these high-rise tower block apartments that kind of you can see Canary Wharf in the distance. And she talked about, well, they were able to work, but I couldn't. And actually that stuck with me because it's actually like looking at it through the mind's eye where, as a professional, you're kind of home and you're working from your computer, we're able to do things like this, but there are people out there who are genuinely suffering from the pandemic and suffering from racial discrimination and suffering from climate change. There are injustices everywhere. So actually you need to be able to connect with that. I'll skip some questions and I'll go to, I think greatest accomplishments. The thing that came to mind was just, I find it hard to look at things from accomplishments because, as David said, you're kind of on an ongoing journey, but just balancing your work with your life. So I love the fact that I can spend time with my kids. I love the fact that I can have difficult conversations with them, and actually bring them into my world sometimes. So I think you just need to keep your perspective on that. It's not just work, as a human being, you've got one life to live, and actually you've got your community, you've got people out there that you need to connect with. And I will go for maybe 3 leadership qualities that have contributed to success. Another question that kind of makes me a little bit, makes me blush a bit, but I think that people will say that I'm a problem solver, very outcomes focused. I think people will say that I'm potentially a systems thinker. So I like to connect the dots between lots of different things. And as part of that, help me trying to predict what's going to happen next. And I think people might say that I'm compassionate because life is tough. Life is really tough. And, kudos to anybody who's navigating it right now. And for those people, and mental health is such a big issue. So for people who are struggling, just remember that there are other people that you can speak to. So just reach out and connect.
Thank you so much to Marissa. Thank you so much to David. And thank you all for attending today's webinar. And before we go, I thought it would be useful just to give a really quick roundup of some of the ideas that we've heard today so that we can go with a skip in our step and a smile on our face as we see from our guest speakers today. So Marissa started off today by really speaking to us about how tiring it can be to constantly have to justify where you are and why it is that you're there. And actually, she spoke about the importance of being able to connect your passion with your purpose. And actually, in the organizational sense, sometimes we see a disparity between words and actions. And actually, when we look at the history of the word woke, it had been initially a way of being able to alert us to injustice, and actually this has been transformed to a consideration of thinking about how we destroy old values. And there's a real need to go back to that initial purpose of thinking about how it is that we alert people to injustice. She also emphasized the importance of focusing on the positives in a career or in a space where you're going to have so many different challenges. The real value that there is in being able to focus on those things which enable you to continue to move forward. But then she also spoke about the the, the value there is in serendipity. And sometimes it can be the case that irrespective of all of the hard work, sometimes there are just things that you're just not going to be aware of that will work in your favor when you are on the right path. She also placed emphasis on the importance of definitions. And we all speak about diversity. We all throw out many actual terms in this space. And this only through really focusing in and understanding what we mean when we say these words that we are able to make progress. And finally, she brought to us a few ideas around pipelines, the importance of pipelines, and being proactive in trying to develop them and make sure that we have as organizations what we need in terms of in order to move forward. She suggested that there was no magic bullet. And as it relates to the individuals, we have to be aware of the mosaic approach in developing people, understanding that we need different types of people within our organizations and that we need to embrace all types of talent. And the thing that I really love is that as opposed to just thinking about career plans, we need to think about career principles. What are the things that we are going to take forward that are going to help us to drive forward? And one of the principles that has really helped her is being uncomfortable with discomfort. And in the space of David, we had so many insightful reflections. So we began with this idea that when companies think about diversity and inclusion, they need to really remember the importance of their connection to community and place. And actually, that was the starting point for his organization and has really helped them in their journey. And in his own personal journey, he's understood that he's been used to not necessarily always seeing many people from similar backgrounds to him, and actually visibility had been a piece that was really significant to see, that he wasn't always able to see people that looked like him, but that was never ever something that deterred him. It was something that he continued to work through and actually has helped him to progress to where he is today. And actually, one thing that has changed is when he went into his profession, he thought about the fact that maybe he could do everything. And obviously, he's a strong man with many strong mental capabilities, but he came to the recognition very quickly that there was a need to actually work with others, to build allies, to build connections. And actually, he emphasized that one of the most important things that he would recommend to people was the importance of networking, being able to work with others, being able to understand, and irrespective of your perceived personal intelligence, being able to network can be such an important key in being able to bring people together and help them to achieve career success. He also highlighted the need from an organizational standpoint to move beyond the what and the discussions about what we are going to do, which we have had over the last few months, and move towards the how, the consideration of what we're going to do, and engage specifically with this idea of nuance, recognizing that different organizations operate in different ways, and we need to look at professions, look at the needs, and look at how it is that we can ensure that diversity and inclusion meets the specific needs that we see in these complex fields. As it relates to organizations, he highlighted that there's a real importance in starting with a root and branch recognition of what the problem is. And actually, as opposed to trying to think that we were going to solve everything straight away, there's a real recognition that we can't, and we won't be able to eat the whole elephant whole. We do need to take a step-by-step approach. And finally, he emphasized the real importance in being able to recognize that because of the nuances that we experience within different organizations, there's a need for being able to assess different options. And this was something that was echoed by Marissa. We do need to be able to understand that these different options are not going to be magic bullets. We need to be able to pick and choose on the basis of the requirements that our organizations have. And so, on that basis, to both of our incredible speakers, thank you for your time, your reflections, everything that you've been able to provide us with today. We've had an action-packed conversation overall where we've explored the impact of race on career progression. We know that we are not going to achieve everything in one day, but the smiles that our guest speakers have been able to put on our faces just at this moment are definitely big ones indeed. And we hope that with this renewed emphasis and energy that they can give us, or that they provided to us in their insights, we can take these insights forward. And for anyone who's listening to this call, a really big thank you for your time and attention. We hope that these insights really do help you. So to everyone, we have no more to say than a really big thank you. Marissa, David, once more, a big thank you to you. To everyone in the audience, thank you. Thank you for joining this YDWC webinar. Go to ydwc.org for any further information on future events or to engage with us. Have a lovely evening all.